Hello, everybody. Just wanted to share with you a video from Tucker Carlson last week on Kamala Harris's visit to Central America, in particular the country of Guatemala. Okay, so here we go.
You think you've had a stressful week. Imagine being Kamala Harris. You take your first big trip south of the border to what we used to call the developing world, and you're pretty excited about it because you know that as a licensed person of color, all the other people of color you're going to meet will be thrilled to see you. That's how it works in the people of color community. They've got so much in common that getting along is effortless. It's one big happy community. You're oppressed, they're oppressed, you'll be friends. If you're Kamala Harris, that's what you've always assumed. But it turns out you were wrong. You finally get to Guatemala and you discover that actually the people there detest you. They could care less about all the glass ceilings you say you've shattered. They're not impressed by your political science degree or the fact that you once chaired the Black Law Students Association in college. They find you phony and annoying. In fact, they strongly prefer the orange man you replaced. At least
That's absolutely true.
he was funny. So they tell you to buzz off and go home. Get out of here and don't come back. Imagine how that must feel if you're Kamala Harris. Quite the psychic blow. So you can't really blame the unnamed White House staffer who swooped in to save the day, hiring a fake Univision reporter to suck up to Kamala Harris and make her feel better. Now, we can't prove that happened, though it does make sense. We do know that Univision denies that the lady who told Harris, "I voted for you," at a press conference, had ever worked for the network. So whoever she was, she made Kamala Harris's day. "Thank you," Harris replied gratefully. And then, her spirits raised, Kamala Harris returned to immigration policy. What is her immigration policy exactly? Simple. Now that we've solved every domestic problem and turned this country into a peaceful, happy utopia, it's time to take all the money we've got left over and give it to Central America. Only by doing that can we solve the, quote, root causes of immigration. Watch.
What we must do to address the root causes of migration, to address the root causes. The issue of root causes is not going to be solved in one trip. To address the root causes as though it's something that can be dealt with overnight, to feel the effects of those root causes on our shores. And the root causes are based on the problems and the challenges that people are facing in countries like Guatemala, which is why I was there. We have to address the root causes.
There's a lot of root causes. So what are these root causes? Well, they include climate change, of course, violence against women, Uber shortages in Midtown over holiday weekends, and the patriarchy. Once we solve those, we're done. We've solved the problem. So it's simple. Make Latin America perfect. That's all we need to do. It shouldn't be hard. People like Kamala Harris have a demonstrated record of dramatically improving everything they touch. Take a trip on Bay Area rapid transit sometime and you'll see what we mean. Which is not to say that transforming Honduras into Monaco will be effortless. A project like that could take weeks. But no matter how long it takes, we have a moral responsibility to do it. Because as Sandy Cortez learned during her recent undergraduate days at Boston University, we're the ones who made Central America crappy in the first place. It's our fault. Everything is our fault, and especially this.
What we as a country, what the United States has not done is actually own up to the fact that we have contributed to regime change, destabilization, and interventionist foreign policy that has contributed to these awful conditions throughout Latin America. And we cannot, as a country, no matter who it is, continue to show up in Latin America and say that this is their fault or that they are to blame.
Now, wait a second, Sandy. Recognizing that you were an international studies major, but still, some of us are wondering, wasn't it Spain that brutally colonized Latin America? So shouldn't Madrid be kicking into the Reconstruction Fund here? Or is European Spain now considered a nation of color and therefore blameless? We'll have to check with a BU professor on that and get back to you. But in the meantime, here's an idea, kind of a random one. Why don't we fix the United States first?
I'm going to stop it there because then he goes on to talk about crime in the United States in comparison to El Salvador. So I'm just going to stop it there. And I wanted to get into the point what he just said about Spain, Spain's fault of what's happening to Latin America today. Yes, partly he is right. He's correct to point out that Spain, it was a colonizer. They killed millions of indigenous peoples all throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Spain, was a brutal empire to say the least, right? But he is not mentioning the U.S. involvement in Latin America. I'm not sure if Tucker Carlson's understands U.S. history in Latin America, but I'm going to go through a timeline that I created for you guys and gals, and I want to just go through each event that happened throughout Latin America, starting with the Monroe Doctrine, which was created around 1823, and it was a warning against European colonizers not to recolonize Latin America, and if they did, it would have been considered hostile to U.S. interest in the region. So, beginning in 1823 to 1825, U.S. forces landed several times in Cuba while still a Spanish territory to attack pirates at that time. Between 1835 and 1836, U.S. forces landed in Peru during the revolution to safeguard U.S. interests in Callao and Lima, right? Between 1846 and 1848, there was a war between the United States and Mexico, which led to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ceded northern Mexico territories to the United States. Between 1852 and 1853, the U.S. sent U.S. Marines to protect U.S. interest in Buenos Aires, Argentina, right? In 1853, U.S. forces landed in Nicaragua for a few days in March during political unrest. In 1854, U.S. naval forces bombarded a Nicaraguan city to avenge insults to a U.S. minister in that country. Between 1855 and 1870, U.S. forces land in some cases repeatedly over the years in Uruguay, Panama, Nicaragua, Mexico. 1855, U.S. mercenaries invade and occupy Nicaragua once again. U.S. forces that same year were sent to Uruguay to protect American lives and property. Then in 1898, the Spanish-American War, which leads to the U.S. winning that war and making the U.S. a colonizer of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines at that time, right? And also it led to U.S. interventions in Cuba once again, okay? Then between 1898 and 1934, that's where the Banana Wars started to take place, right? So the U.S. intervened in many countries in Latin America for the United Fruit Company, right? In 1904, Theodore Roosevelt enforces the Monroe Doctrine and declares the U.S. to be the policeman of the Caribbean. U.S. forces placed the Dominican Republic under a customs receivership. 1905, U.S. Marines land in Honduras. Okay? Between 1906 and 1909, under the Platt Amendment, U.S. forces occupy Cuba and direct its political and economic development. Between 1909 and 1912, William Howard Taft, who was the president then, promoted dollar diplomacy based on the belief that increased U.S. investment in the region will bring stability and economic prosperity to Latin America. In 1912, United Fruit Company begins operations in Honduras and later became a major force throughout Central America, right? Between 1912 and 1925, U.S. Marines intervene in Nicaragua. In 1914, U.S. forces shell and then occupy Veracruz, Mexico. 1915 to 1934, U.S. Marines were stationed in Haiti. 1916 to 1924, U.S. Marines occupied the Dominican Republic. 1917 to 1922, U.S. troops occupied Cuba again. In 1918, U.S. Army lands in Panama to protect the United Fruit Company's special interests. 1920 to 1921, U.S. troops supported coup in Guatemala. 1926 to 1933, U.S. Marines occupy Nicaragua and fight against nationalistic forces led by Augusto Cesar Sandino. 1933, U.S. offers to intervene in El Salvador to put down a peasant rebellion. 1936 to 1979, U.S. supported 3 different Somozas as dictators of Nicaragua. 1954, the CIA overthrew the constitutionally elected government of Jacobo Arbenz Guzman in Guatemala. This is an interesting one. Between 1957 and 1986, Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier ruled Haiti as dictators with full U.S. support. 1959, dictator Benicio Batista, supported by the U.S. until 1958, flees Castro's revolution in Cuba. In 1957, this is an interesting one. U.S. high school students in Panama Canal Zone burn a Panamanian flag, sparking riots that kill and injure more than 100 people. Fast forward to 1965, U.S. forces fearing a communist takeover occupied the Dominican Republic once again. Between 1970 and 1973, the U.S. and its multinational corporations worked covertly to overthrow socialist government El Salvador Allende in Chile. And he dies in September 1973 in a military coup. Between 1981 and 1988, the Reagan administration strongly supported the Salvadorian military in their fight against the FMLN guerrillas. Okay? In 1994, Big Willie, Bill Clinton, threatened the invasion of Haiti by U.S. troops. In 2001, the U.S. begins Plan Colombia, a controversial multi-million-dollar program to fight Colombian guerrillas and drug traffickers. And that worked out well, right? I mean, there's cocaine all over the United States, and heroin, by the way, coming in from Afghanistan. And lastly, in 2009, President Barack Obama and his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, planned the overthrow of Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, which ousted him in the middle of the night in his pajamas. Okay? So for Tucker Carlson to say that it's Spain's fault that the Latin American countries are now are in disaster modes. I mean, they're destroyed countries, and it was basically through it began with the Spanish Empire and it continued with the U.S. Empire, right, in Latin America, and that's why you have mass migrations coming out of Honduras, right? In Honduras, there's a people going through through Mexico in order to make it to the borders of the United States. And it's not only just people from Honduras. There's Haitians, there's people from Guatemala and other countries. So it's the fault of 2 main empires, 2 Western empires, the Spanish Empire and the U.S. Empire.